Hello, it's Manu here. Today we are going to discuss a topic called the whale. What is it and why I would argue that it is of utmost importance for us humans? This topic is a little bit complex and abstract, but I try to keep it coherent with examples and go through with some ideas to help you understand that what I mean with the whale. Because I've been thinking about it for quite a while, and today I felt like I have at least some part of it crystallized. Back when I was living in Jyväskylä, I had a friend, a quantum physicist. I actually have his dissertation here called Hadronic Interactions at High and Low Energies. And inside there is a note from him. To Manu, may you feel inspired. And inspired I was. Maybe not all of the contents in here because it goes over my head, but this topic we kept discussing. And the topic was the whale. Now, I didn't use that term before, but he was the one using it. I didn't have a name for it, but he did. I don't know if he coined it, but I've started to like it more and more through time. The conversations we had, there were these ideas and notions of consciousness and understanding. We just kept going over and over again in different variations. And how there seems to be this whale between us humans as a witness of perceiving reality and the actual reality itself. Now, what did I just do? You could argue that I used an argumentative fallacy called appeal to authority by showing this book, and with showing it and telling that my friend is a quantum physicist, I gave more gravitas to what I am about to say. But that's not the whole truth. What I also did was to give you an introduction to this idea that I'm going to talk about. But that's not all I did. And so on. Now this is kind of like the level of abstraction that we are about to go through and what this whale is about, in a way. So, what is the whale? I will not just say what it is, but first I will try to give you some examples to kind of like show what I consider to be part of the whale. And first we could talk about language itself. Now I am talking to you, and by doing that, I have this belief that these words that I am about to say to you are translated to you and understood by you. Now, it is a pretty wild thing to think about, that all these random noises that I make, muscle movements and mouth shapes, they produce sounds, and these sounds compiled one after another make something that translates an idea that I have in me to you and to be understood by you. In a way, we are having this belief on these outside of us forces in syntax and symbols that could be kind of like shared between people to create a bridge between understanding. And I would say that in a way the language is a gift but also a prison, because sometimes it feels that the language has some boundaries, that we are not able to perceive the wholeness of reality with just the words. And there's also a possibility for misunderstanding in a way that you don't understand what I say, or that you take the things I say too literally and not leave air for other things that it may entail. And outside of the language itself, by me talking to you, there are other forces at play. For example, intention. Why am I saying these things to you? And why is someone talking to other person? What can we get from their body and their movement and things like that. And how sometimes we may intrinsically feel these forces at play in a way. Even if we are not saying anything, we may understand something from other person just by looking at them. And we share this understanding between people, or the feeling of understanding. Sometimes the words that we decide to use are not as literal. We use symbolism and allegories. And that is also a pretty interesting thing, a phenomenon. Why would we talk about other thing in order to talk about other thing? Slavoj Žižek, in his book Violence, had this example. He was talking about the atrocities of war, and he argued that the ruthlessness and the tragedy of wars and things happening globally are so extreme that us humans aren't able to comprehend the pure reality of a tragedy. And instead, we should sometimes opt to, let's say, poems, movies and music to talk about these things. This may sound as a pretty odd thing to say, but it rings truth to me more and more each day. And I believe that this has something to do with the veil as well. That us humans aren't able to comprehend reality so well with literal communication, and how sometimes the use of symbolism may help us to grasp a bigger picture of this reality. So this idea of communication of reality is part of the veil to me. There is this curtain between us and reality, and we filter things through it. And being literal can be kind of like a cage, because saying literal things pinpoints you to a very small part of reality, whereas a use of symbolism leaves more room for things outside of the thing that we just said. And it tells us that the thing that we are just talking about is maybe more universal than just this one example that we are using. Now, in a way, this could be also talked about when we are talking about dreams. I just recently made a video about my dreams and how they feel very allegorical, and it's so fascinating how our dreams are able to produce people, like the people that we know and sometimes even people that we don't know, and how they are poetic, symbolic, and they bring us this playground that we may be able to analyze further. It's not just a thing that happens in a dream, but what does it mean? For example, if I was anxious and then I see a dream where someone is just saying to me, "You're anxious," or I am saying that to myself, "I'm anxious." Well, that would be interesting, but maybe not as powerful as a scenery where this anxiousness can play out. It's kind of like a play, a theater play. And now let's talk about music. Music is a very complex phenomenon. It's a series of waveforms, complex waveforms, and how there is these sine waves, square waves, triangle waves, and them added together can create different levels of notes, different amplitude, meaning how loud they are perceived, and also the lyrics that are in songs, for example. They are all intertwined, and somehow we are able to understand them inherently. We get these waveforms inside our head, and then they are analyzed with our ears and brain, and then they are able to make us feel a certain way. Some music may feel uplifting, some may make you feel hopeless, some may empower you, things like that. And it's not just the waveforms and the notes, but it's more to do with the relation between the notes. The song may still have all of the power of it intact, even if we transpose the song, because by transposing a song we keep these relations between notes intact, basically. It's wild that we take this for granted, that these abstract noises can make us feel things, and how it works kind of like a language. A musician has something to tell, and they are telling it not with words, but with sound, music. In a way, music is a type of a language. We are creating information and passing it to other person. And just how words can make us feel a certain way, a piece of music can make us feel a certain way as well. And the whale is somewhere between the intention of the composer and the perceiver. Then one more example. An example from the world of sexuality. I made this painting, and I call this painting Agalma. Agalma is a word used by Jacques Lacan. It comes from Greek mythology, and it basically is this thing that is somewhere inside us humans, the thing that is an object of desire, something that we are interested in another person, but a thing that is also always hidden, something that we are not able to get into in another person. So one way to look at this painting is an act of penetration. This black jewel here could be maybe a person. Yellow and blue symbolizing femininity and masculinity. And here is an act of penetration. But how the act of penetration is also making this thing invisible behind it. And I guess that was one of the main ideas behind this painting, that by desiring another individual, we are trying to get into this agalma, but the agalma will always stay invisible to us. A Jungian psychologist called Marie-Louise von Franz, she said that the anima, the feminine shadow in male, is shown in our reality as this desire, a fantasy of another person. And how this shadow, the feminine shadow, keeps us from actually loving another person and keeping us caged in this level of illusion, a fantasy of another person. Now, at least to me, this idea of the anima seems pretty prevalent with us humans, that both men and women may have these desires, sexual fantasies, that are not about loving the other person, but instead we are focusing on the idea that we have. And the idea is not the other person, but is something that we are desiring. We are focused on our own desires, when instead we ought to be going outside of our bodies in order to love another human being. This is something that is pretty hard for me to verbalize, but I have this intrinsic feeling that the veil is working against us in the playground of love. This veil between people, and I would argue that it comes from shame. And talking about shame, let's go biblical for a little bit. The story of Adam and Eve in Genesis. When they take a bite of the tree of knowledge, they learn to be ashamed of their bodies, and they start to use a fig leaf to cover their genital areas. Often this is told as an allegory of shame, of being a human, but there are different variations on this, different analysis, and to me right now it tells a story about the force of knowledge, because when human beings started to get a level of consciousness where we were able to understand more intraneous things and also extraneous things outside of us, we are able to perceive us in relation to the reality and other people. And this emergence of knowledge creates ideas like shame, lust, envy, but also love and happiness, things like that. And by us putting a fig leaf to our genital areas, we are hiding the symbols of procreation, a thing that is important to us to create life, which is probably the most important thing of living, the life itself. And at least today, I find the symbol of the fig leaf quite beautiful in a way. We are not showing the thing, but we are hiding it. And by hiding it, we are giving it more importance. We are showing its rightful importance. Jacques Lacan had a term called jouissance surplus, and it basically means all the things that could be enjoyable in a thing versus when you are actually doing the thing, that you get the more concrete thing that what it actually is, and how the idea of the thing may have more surplus of enjoyment than the thing itself. An example, how I would love to have a bag of candy here and all the good things that it gives to me, versus me actually having the bag of candy here, eating it. Then the surplus of the enjoyment vanishes into thin air, and all we are left with is what it actually is, and also all the negative things it is. You can also get this with the acts of sex and masturbation. When climax comes, what we are left with is the reality itself, and all the notions of what it could have been vanishes. So, in a sense, the objects have more enjoyment than the act of acting on the desire. The fig leaf hiding our procreational organs is the veil. Now at this point I could maybe try to answer what is the veil. The reality is probably a very complex fractal, and we as witnesses to this reality are trying to comprehend it. And the veil helps us to understand the complex nature of this reality. So in a way, the veil, a curtain, is this higher dimensional plane, a compiler that helps us to get a grip on what reality could be. By me saying this thing, you are getting a certain information, but that information is not the whole truth. It's just a fraction of the actual wholeness of this reality we are in. So why do we need the veil? At least I would argue that the human psyche is way more complex than the actual level of consciousness that we have. This brings to my mind a quote by the Jungian psychologist Marie-Louise von Franz that I already talked about. She said this about creative people who are not creating in their life. She said, "People who have a creative side and do not live without are most disagreeable clients. They make a mountain out of a molehill, fuss about unnecessary things, are too passionately in love with somebody who is not worth so much attention, and so on. There is a kind of floating charge of energy in them which is not attached to its right object, and therefore tends to apply exaggerated dynamism to the wrong situation." And this rings a bell, at least in my brain. It resonates. Because I would say that I am a very creative individual, and whenever I'm not creating, I start to invent problems. Like I start to think that I may be sick when I'm actually not. I'm just burned out, for example. And all these things happen because I am not creating. Now, the act of creating itself is very interesting. Why do we have the need to create? Well, there could be a physical side to it. For example, the whole universe is this bundle of entropy, and we are these vessels that disperse this entropy into smaller particles by just living. We are gathering energy from the sun, and then it dissipates through us in different ways. And by creating, we are creating more vessels to disperse of this entropy. But on top of this physical theory, there is also a more symbolic theory, or maybe even more concrete theory, a theory of mind, that I will talk about a little bit later. But first I would say that how we use this veil, how we are not talking about the thing itself, but we are using these roundabouts, these side quests, to get to the bottom of a thing. How do we use them in our lives? We may use them quite often, but subconsciously. For example, by taking a shower, what are you doing? You could argue that you are just taking a shower. But you are also cleaning your body. And by cleaning your body, you are telling yourself that you are worth it to keep living. And thus, by cleaning your body, you are having a better hygiene, and you are telling yourself that it is worth it to do this act of cleaning and to prolong this act of living. And all these other things of self-betterment. There are these rituals that we do that tell us a number of things we don't have to be conscious of, but in a way we are by doing them. Things like these are like praying, manifesting, all these things. We are acting on a play of our desires and our wishes to be better, and we are creating these symbols that tell us that we are on a path to this self-betterment. And, for example, if we are good to other people, we are not just being good to other people, but we are telling them that they are worth our goodness. And it creates this camaraderie between humanity. And then the esoteric knowledge. Esoteric meaning hidden knowledge. And the hidden is a little bit of a wonky word, because it doesn't mean that like the knowledge is intentionally kept hidden, but it's all this information that is maybe inside us, but we are keeping hidden from ourselves because there are things that we are maybe not able to confront, or things that we have learned not to confront. And if we don't have the tools to understand these ideas and things that we have. So to gain this esoteric knowledge, you must work for it. You must go to your ego and be truthful to yourself. So in order to get to this more actual reality, that's what's happening inside you, you need to do certain rituals. Whether it is an actual ritual or just meditating. Basically, it means to do extra effort to go to it. And this extra effort is this side quest in order to get to a more actual perceived reality. And all these rituals that we invent, they kind of like work as a bridge between the conscious and subconscious levels in our mind and understanding. So the act of creation that I was talking about, I would maybe say right now that by us living on this planet Earth, we are able to be conscious of it. But there are so many aspects of reality that are hidden from us. Like, take this book. We see one object, whereas in actual reality it may be consistent of millions and millions of molecules. And these molecules consist of trillions and trillions of atoms. And these atoms consist of millions and millions of protons, electrons, and these protons consist of muons, quarks, and the quarks, they consist maybe of strings, these filaments, if we believe in string theory. So if string theory is correct, it could be that the whole reality consists of these tiny, tiny Planck-length filaments that are vibrating, and this vibration creates energies and forces, and these forces create bigger molecules and atoms, and the atoms gain properties, they gain weight. If I look at this book, I don't need to see all of these strings in action. If I saw the whole reality as it is, the brain would probably melt because of the computational power that you need to perceive all of it. But by us being here and being able to talk about these things, we get this innate need to understand where we are and why we are. So reality seems to be this dance between being and trying to understand what being is. So I would argue that at its highest level, being creative is the act of being and trying to understand what being is. And at the same time, we don't have to understand this, any of this. We are able to live without knowing this. But by us trying to understand, we are taking steps in this Jacob's ladder. And with this, I would like to leave you with two ideas. First is to accept the mystery. And the second idea is that us humans, we are probably never able to perceive the pure reality. But that shouldn't stop us from trying. See you in the next video.